Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the MotoGP-Xtra podcast. I'm Reese, better known as Biker Gaming, and joining me today for some in-depth analysis is Dylan. If you do enjoy today's podcast, feel free to like the video on YouTube and rate the podcast 5 stars on Spotify. So kicking off the Mandalika GP with Moto3 qualifying, there was a little bit of controversy because Riccardo Rossi had a huge crash at turn 2. I think he was even knocked out. It looked like he'd been pretty knocked out, but then he got straight back on his bike. It was just completely weird. What do you think of the stewards after the first couple of races, Dylan?
Yeah, we've had two races so far, and we already have to kick off the episode with a stewards failing the sport again. He was clearly, if he was not knocked out, he was definitely shook up, and he got up, rode back, and a lot of people giving out. And we will cover later in the episode another concussion scenario. So they're very inconsistent, and once again, qualifying Moto3 FIM stewards are just always there's always something with the stewards going. It's not nice to see. We just want to have some. We've had so many issues this weekend. We were kind of hoping that the stewards would be on the money because we had some weather issue, track issue, tire issues, and we were hoping the stewards would be on a level keel and be consistent at least. But once again, we did not get any consistency, and we were left confused about the rules as we do most weekends.
Yeah, it was really, really strange because even at one point it said that he'd been taken to the medical centre and then it literally showed him on track like a second later, so that was clearly not the case. So, yeah, the stewards, once again, just seeming to let us down. But on a bit more of a positive note, obviously being the Indonesian Grand Prix, what a qualifying from Mario Aggi, putting it on the front row in front of his home crowd. It's unbelievable. I'm sure the fans absolutely love that. I mean, it's great for him. What do you think of Aggi's performance this weekend?
Actually, built a brilliant performance all the way up to Saturday. It feels like he just peaked in Q2 on Saturday, and his weekend kind of went down from there. But he started out good on Friday. I think he was P4 in one of the free practice sessions, and we're all kind of hoping he'd have a good qualifying. And then to throw it on the front row, we were all shocked by it and delighted to see that the home rider, the 18-year-old, had managed something special as home race. But yeah, good to see. They absolutely adore him in Indonesia, and it's good to see another young Asian rider come through and showing a bit of pedigree to put it on the front row up against a very stacked Moto 3 grid.
Yeah, it was really, really good to see Aggi at the front there. But speaking of other fast rookies, we've got Diego Moreira once again impressing this weekend. He had a fantastic weekend in Qatar. Unfortunately, the race didn't really go to plan for him, but once again, looking really, really good in qualifying. I think he was second on the grid, wasn't he? So he's been so impressive so far. He sort of came out of nowhere. I don't think anyone really touted him as someone that was going to do this, but he seems to be amazing so far.
Yeah, again, with last year with Pedro Costa coming through, blowing everyone out of the water as a rookie, we thought this year we go, okay, we'll see more rookies maybe fighting for top tens, and we'll talk about how great result for a CV rider to come up and get into the top 10 in the world. But we've had 3 or 4 rookies this year. With also just a quick shout out for Daniel Holgado, P9 for him in his second race, only just under 6 seconds off at Dennis Fodger, who was 3 and 4 seconds ahead of P2. So we'll get into it in the race. It was a huge battle for P2 and P3. But yeah, rookies really showing off some serious performance early in the season.
Yeah, I hadn't even really thought about Holgado, but yeah, he actually did have a really good performance, wasn't he? It was the sort of the 4 Red Bull KTM bikes were all sort of battling throughout that. So whilst we're talking about the battle, we may as well talk about the big scrap for second place. What a battle that was! Obviously, the 2 gas bikes, obviously the 4 Red Bull KTM's, like I mentioned. Obviously, there was Mino involved as well. I think Tatai was obviously involved. Quite just so many riders. It was a super aggressive battle, and to be honest, I was surprised how relatively clean they kept it for Moto 3, because we saw in last week's race there was a few collisions. Garcia, obviously not. I think he knocked Tatai off actually last week, wasn't it? It was Tatai knocked off, and obviously there's a contact between Toba and Masia last week as well. But this race did overall seem a bit cleaner, but some of the moves were still a little bit harsh. But it was a great battle for second place. What did you think to that?
Yeah, great battle again. 11 riders going for P2. Now, in the end, Eisen Guevara just managed to just having the extra season in the class, seemed to just figure out with about 3 laps ago, managed to gap Mino and Tatai and the like behind him, and end up having a bit of a comfortable P2. But the final pace on the podium, that was 10 riders. You couldn't really put a question on any of them not getting on it because they were all. There's something about the Mandalika circuit. It's a bit like Sepang where there's multiple lines. You can really shove it up the inside for a block pass, and where some circuits you go, okay, there's three places on the track you know you can overtake, and they're all crazy into them spots. It's like every second corner there's someone going for a really tight line. The rider in front wants to take a wide swooping line just to make that gap, but as a spectator, it was brilliant to watch. There was a lot of racing, but unfortunately, as we get to the second to last lap, it all kind of fell apart, and we did see, I think, four riders crash in the last lap. Both incidents were the rider behind T-boning the rider, so unfortunately, it was great until we got the last lap, and I think they all, just what I just mentioned, the positives of how great the track is, it kind of turned into a negative on the last lap with all the collisions, unfortunately.
Yeah, we may as well talk about the collisions now. Obviously, Mino, the championship leader, being one of the riders T-boned there by Sasaki from behind. It was a bit of an optimistic move. There's a few passes like that throughout the race. I think we'd got quite lucky it hadn't happened already. But last lap, people are a little bit more over the limit. And I actually think that Mino and Sasaki have a little bit of form for colliding before in the past, which is interesting. But yeah, Sasaki obviously went for the move on Mino, took out the championship leader, and that's really not what Mino needs, because he had a great race in Qatar. Obviously, was pretty lucky to actually inherit, funnily enough, from Sasaki. Obviously, the lead once Sasaki had his issues, but he put himself in a great position. Looks like he's up for it for this season. He wants to try and fight for this championship. He wants to try and bring home the points. He knew he couldn't beat Foggia today, so he was sort of taking stock. He wasn't doing anything too silly, to be fair, in that battle for second place. He was just sort of trying to keep to the front of it, and unfortunately, once again, taken out. He seems to always be in the wrong place at the wrong time, which maybe is something he should take a look at, but yeah, it's Mino just really not ideal for him.
Yeah, again, he's one of the older ones in the class, and I reckon he's sitting there looking at Antonelli's seat going, that's me next year. I have that seat, because Antonelli, again, there's so many question marks over. I don't think he'll be in the GP paddock next year. Never mind just Moto 2. I think he'll maybe follow suit with Bulega and go over to maybe World Superbikes or something or other. I don't see him. I think he's had so long in the GP paddock that he's been passed out, and I think he needs maybe just a change of scenery. But for back to Mino, I reckon he knows he doesn't have the bike maybe under him as Foggia does. That Leopard Honda is just, it looks like a different class of machinery. It's actually scary how fast and how well they can get that bike going, considering the engines are given at random. So it's like a lot of people say, oh, they all get preferential treatment. The engine, they're given a number, they go collect them engines, they bolt them into the frame, and that's it. There's no A spec, B spec engines from Honda or Gas or any of the KTM boys. They all get equal engines. So they're just doing something. It must be gearing. They might have a perfect suspension to get absolute brilliant drive. But whatever it is, they're doing something right, because Foggia was an absolute dominant rider. Danny Kent style, pulling away. He got to the front, and you actually see Mino in the race just jump into P2, and he tries to go with him, but Foggia just had so much over them. He was quickest in morning warm-up, and in the race, so he just clicked out. He was top-notch again, brilliant. A bit like Cesino Vietti in Qatar, just got to the front, disappeared, hit his apex, and a very good 25 points to start off his championship challenge, I reckon.
Yeah, Foggia was absolutely unbelievable today. I mean, like you say, he got to the front. Mino knew immediately he had to try and go with him, and he did. He went with him sort of for about a lap. He had dropped back a bit, but then he lost the front, didn't he, into the last corner, and that's really what sort of dropped him back. It put him back in the clutches of the two gas bikes, and that was it then. Foggia had got away. Like you say, Danny Kent style. It's a very Leopard victory. Just they've always had massive advantage in terms of the engines. And again, like you were saying, there's no preferential treatment. It's not like the old 125, 250 days where, you know, the manufacturer decided who was going to win the race based on, you know, what package. Like, you could be on a Honda, but your Honda might be 20, well, maybe not 20, but like 5 mile an hour slower down the straight than the other guys, and you're never going to stand a chance. But Leopard seemed to have that bike set up so well, just allowed Foggia to ease away. It looked easy for him. I mean, he was cruising by the end, and obviously he did a massive wheelie up towards the line. You know, when a rider does that, they've got a big lead. So yeah, outstanding from Foggia. Got his championship fight really started, because obviously he had a bit of a poor Qatar, but then again, that was just because he was weaving in qualifying. If he hadn't done that, he would have probably won that race too. So, yeah, it looks like Foggia is going to be the man to beat this year. But speaking of other people that had a good race, we've got Carlos Tatai, put it on pole position for the first time in his career. And then it was just an interesting race for him. He didn't start too well. He dropped back a little bit. He had a long lap penalty, but managed to fight his way back through up to be on the podium. It was, considering that he's not really shown too much when he was in the Sponsorama team before, it was nice to see, and he was really, really fast.
Yeah, CF Moto's first pole position as well. I had some question marks. I know it's a reskinned KTM, but I always look at the KTM. That's their full blown factory. Either Husqvarna is going to be as quick as a KTM, or the CF Moto Chinese reskin of the KTM. So for them to be on pole, and as well, he got the long lap, but he had a great race, and he seemed very positive in the race. There was overtaking it, a lot of confidence in front end of the bike, and made up that P3 in the last couple of corners. Just managed to pip Garcia and Dennis Anchu. So again, he had a lot of promise when he came into the Moto 3 class. It took a couple of years to kind of get his head around the speed of the world level riders, but maybe now this year he could have a good season. He started well, and it was great to see another new rider on pole position. But I'd say that is probably everything we've covered for Moto 3. So we're going to jump on now to Moto 2. Dixon finally showing his potential in qualifying, sticking it on pole. What did you make of the British riders' overall weekend up to his pole position lap?
Well, it was really a phenomenal weekend because, well, I would say it was unexpected, but based on his pre-season form and his form from Qatar, it's not too unexpected. But the way he sort of dominated the weekend, obviously, he was top when it was a bit wet. He was top when it was dry. He put it on pole. He just looked the part all weekend. It looks like he's finally clicked with Moto 2. He's shown some signs of brilliance in the past, which we saw back in 2020 at Le Mans. Obviously, he was leading the race for a while till he crashed, and we'll sort of come back to that later. But yeah, he's shown some potential over the years, and when he was in the Aspar team before, obviously it was a KTM, so he wasn't doing too well. But this year, he seems to really click with the team, really click with the bike, and he seems really, really fast, which is it's nice to see because he's a nice guy. So yeah, it's always good to see the nice guys doing well, and just really, really good to see.
Now, for the race of Moto 2, we did have a shortened distance due to track conditions. They had adjusted overall the weekend was put a bit later in the local time to just make it slightly better for the Europeans. And there was a bit of criticism of flack I've seen on Twitter. Andrew Pitt was a bit critical of it, saying that the later you go in the rain season, the later in the day, the more chance of rain. So they ended up shortening Moto 2. And even at the start, it was spitting. It was a very aggressive start. A lot of riders battling. I think a lot of them had in their head, because there's no flag to flag in Moto 2. Red flag, lap comeback. I think a lot of riders wanted to be in high positions. And what did you make of the start in the Moto 2 race, considering the conditions?
Well, the start itself was pretty aggressive. It was almost a bit like a Moto 3 race. I think it's because everybody knew that potentially the race could get stopped at any point. That if the rain came down, the race had already been shortened, so they didn't have to do too many laps. Actually, get to 2/3 race distance, which would be full points. And once that happens, if there's a little bit of rain, they're more than happy to stop the race because everyone's going to get their full points. No one's going to moan. So everybody was going off the start, being super, super aggressive with each other. Simone Corsi probably in particular, which, that's not a surprise knowing Simone, but it was good to see him up there on the MV Agusta, which was actually working pretty well this weekend by the looks of it. I think the MV Agusta is almost a little bit like the Speed Up was like quite a while ago, where at some tracks it actually works pretty well. So Simone was up there, he was bashing with Vietti a little bit at the start of the race. It wasn't just them, of course. Everybody was sort of just gunning for it, trying to be as fast as possible, just to try and get up into a high position in case the race does get stopped. But yeah, it was an interesting start.
Yeah, and we move on now to the first casualty of the race. Jake Dixon made it up to P2. Maybe got caught out with a spot of rain or something, but unfortunately took the front not long after passing Sam Lowe's. He was chasing now and did look like to have the pace maybe to pull in the race leader, Chantra, at the time, but unfortunately we'll never know, as he did end up in the gravel a couple of laps later. Another false dawn, or does Dixon really have something to fight with this year?
I think in terms of his pace, he's definitely shown that he's got it, because obviously the way he has been throughout testing, throughout the Qatar weekend, obviously his race pace in Qatar was phenomenal. It's just he was a victim of the sort of the thing with the Costa and Aldeguer where they all ran wide the first corner, and in Moto2 you can't come back from that. It's just too competitive of a field. So I think Dixon has got the pace. By the sounds of it, from what he said on an interview, he did everything the exact same. They looked at the data and he fell off. So I think, yeah, he probably did just get a little bit unlucky with a wet patch. But of course, that is 2 times he's fell out of a good position, and really, there's the only times he's been in that kind of position. So hopefully, he doesn't beat himself up too much with that. Hopefully, it doesn't become an issue. But it is a little bit of a pattern. Obviously, it's only twice, so it's not too bad. But if it happens again, then people are going to start asking questions. So yeah, Dixon was a bit of a shame for him, but it was still a good showing overall. He was quick, so it wasn't the end of the world really. But like you say, he was looking like he might be able to catch up to the race leader, who was Somkiat Chantra. If you said that before the weekend, well, you may as well go and buy a lottery ticket, because you can obviously predict the future somehow. Because Chantra, I'm going to be honest, hasn't ever really shown much. He's had a couple of good weekends here and there where he's had decent pace. A couple of times Austria, I think Thailand a few years ago, which was his home Grand Prix. So bit start-stoppy kind of tracks. He's shown some pace there or thereabouts. I think once he did have podium pace, but I think he sort of faded or fell off. I can't remember. It was a few years ago now. But there was one race I do remember where he actually could have potentially fought for the podium. But he showed good pace on Saturday in qualifying, sort of out of nowhere. And then the start he got into the race, barreling it into the first corner, taking the lead, and then he did a Vietti from the last race. He just cleared off. I can't believe it. I really can't believe it. He'd obviously been looking good over the course of Saturday, but I would never in a million years thought he was going to win the race. But so happy for him. But I've never even really seen him be interviewed before. He seems like a really nice guy. He was super, super happy. So what a race it was for Chantra.
Yeah, I think it was just he had the perfect operating window of that kind of conditions where it was humid, moisture on the track, a few drops of rain, and I think that's just like they always say, you never beat an Irishman in the rain, or the British are always good in mixed conditions. Same goes for when it's hot, sticky, and moist, and just that kind of horrendous condition no one wants to ride. I think look at the Malaysians, the Thais, the Indonesians, that's what they grew up riding day in, day out. So it's just absolutely suited him down to the ground. And it was brilliant to see him get his debut win. But midway through the race, we did have rain. And Dunlop did say, what, about 6 laps ago, I think, that it was a bit of a question mark of how the tyres had held up because of all the mixed conditions. Nobody had really done a full length race run. So what did you make of the last third of the race with all the rain, the issues with maybe tyres? How did you think it all worked out?
It must have been pretty tough for the riders because, of course, there was rain coming down, but I think it was more mental rain. It wasn't really wetting the track too much. Obviously, there probably was a little bit of dampness because, well, like we said, that might have been what happened to Dixon, really. But, yeah, I think it was important they just kept their pace up and didn't slow down, because that's what can cause you to crash in those kind of conditions where you slow down and perhaps I say you lose a bit of temperature, but you definitely weren't going to lose temperature today. It was absolutely, it was unbelievably hot. So, yeah, you've just got to try and keep your pace up, keep your concentration there, don't get distracted by the rain, not make the mistake. And, of course, yeah, obviously it was an unknown for the riders. They didn't know how the tyres were going to last. Obviously, the Dunlop Moto2s are a pretty safe bet. I mean, you could ride on them all day and they'd still have a bit of grip left. They are unbelievable tyres. They last for so long, and as it showed, there didn't seem to be any tyre issues for anybody. I didn't see anybody dramatically drop back at the end, so everybody seemed to be in the same boat with that, and it was kind of typical Moto2 in a way towards the end. The gaps had formed, and that was it. You can't really bridge the gaps anymore, so yeah, the tyres seemed to make it to the end of the race. Everybody sort of stayed upright during the wet conditions, so yeah, it was fairly typical Moto2, really.
Yeah, quite a quiet race, really. That was obviously the aggressive start. Dixon making a few moves. Everyone was a bit surprised with Chantra up front, but other than that, it was kind of I wouldn't say a boring race, but it was your typical Moto2 going through the motions. Cesino Vietti obviously seemed to have serious pace and again managed to get ahead when he finally passed Simone Corsi. Managed to gap him and just started taking people. and eventually got to P2, and he had a very good race. And now, I don't know, is it too early yet? Because always, now obviously this is our first Indonesian Grand Prix in 25 years, but we usually start off with Qatar, Termas, Texas, our opening three, and they're kind of they're always a bit of an anomaly. You're in different parts of the world. A lot of people, it's kind of well known saying that the season starts in Jerez when we have the start of the European rounds. And usually whoever wins the European rounds, that's really your man for the championship. So it'll be interesting to see Cestino when we get to Jerez. Can he replicate his form that he's had so far in Qatar? And now also, just early in the race, he had small few issues, getting beaten up by Corsi was a couple of them. And if he maybe got a better start, you never know. He might have been able to push Chancellor into a mistake. But definitely highly impressed with Cestino so far. So keep an eye on him for when we get to Europe. I think if he's strong in Europe, he's definitely my favourite for the championship at the moment. With the likes of Lowe's still having a few issues with his wrist, and rookie Pedro Costa just finding his feet a bit tougher than he thought it would be early in his Moto2 career. But other than that, there wasn't much else to say about Moto2, so we're going to jump swiftly on to the MotoGP. But before we get into the race, we have a lot to cover over the weekend. So the issues with track temperature on Thursday, the track temperature was 67 degrees, which is nearly, I think, the record for the hottest temperatures we've had on track. So Michelin were forced their hand to bring a 2018 style tyre where it was basically, it doesn't absorb heat as much, doesn't have much grip, a bit of a bowling ball tyre, if you will. And it really threw up the grid for Friday and Saturday. What did you make of the tyre changes before the Mantlake GP?
Well, first of all, got to say, I think it was the correct decision. You've always got to go with the safety option. Obviously, Michelin got all that data from the test. Were like, yeah, these tyres are not going to be safe to use. So they brought the old the Southeast Asian tyre, really, isn't it? For these temperatures, that's what this tyre was made for tracks like Thailand, I suppose now Indonesia, now it's on the calendar. So this old sort of 2018 style tyre was designed purely for these races to make it to the end. So bringing that tyre was the right choice, but it definitely caused some chaos for quite a few riders. That's mainly what is going to be spoken about, I suppose, before we get onto the race. Obviously, we had the Suzukis were both struggling really all weekend. Mir in particular, Rins could kind of make it work a little bit, but Mir just was, I think he was bottom of the timesheets in the first free practice session. And I don't think he's ever been bottom of the timesheet ever. He's been quick since he started in MotoGP, so it was a shock to see that for me. Obviously, he wasn't getting on with that. The Hondas were all complaining, so yeah, there was lots and lots of issues with the tyre for some of the manufacturers, but then some of the other manufacturers, I think it might have suited them a little bit. I think the KTM in the dry was looking a lot better, definitely, so perhaps that different tyre was suiting them, but everybody's in the same boat. Everyone's got the same tyres, so you got to just adjust your setup accordingly.
Mark Marquez is what we're going to have to cover next. Unfortunately, Mark has had. It's a strange weekend for Mark. I had some flashbacks to Valentino at Laguna in 2010, I believe it was. 4 crashes for Rossi that weekend, 4 crashes for Marquez this weekend. We'll get on to him further in the race, but he has also been very vocal about the new Honda, saying that with the old Honda, you could feel the front, you could feel where the limit was. Well, he could anyway. That was a kind of an issue with other riders not being able to feel the front. But now he says he doesn't know where the limit of front end is, and pretty much all 4 crashes were big crashes. There wasn't any first gear just tipped off the edge of the tyre. They're all 100 mile an hour plus crashes. And the guy coming back from injury, the injuries he's had over the last 18 to 2 years, is it's a bit scary to see him thrown around like that, getting ragdoll through the gravel. And we'll have to cover the warm-up crash that ended up putting him out of the race in a second. But what did you make his weekend up until Sunday morning when he had his horrific eyesight?
Well, it was kind of abysmal from start to finish, wasn't it, his weekend? I mean, I think he was the fastest Honda looking at it, but it was going way over the limit. It was like watching 2015 Marc Marquez again. He just couldn't accept the fact it wasn't his weekend, and he was just trying and trying and trying, and he was crashing all the time. He obviously is struggling with this new Honda. In Qatar, it seemed like he wasn't quite there because obviously, well, he got beat by Paul, so that kind of, he's always been the top Repsol Honda rider. He's never been beaten by a teammate, really. Pedrosa, when he first started, could beat him on the occasional weekend, but really since then, no one's been close to him. So him losing there showed he was struggling with the Honda. But this weekend, he was, like you say, 4 crashes. Obviously, 2 in qualifying 1. So he was in qualifying 1, which is fairly unusual for him to begin with. Although, I suppose not so much as of late, but in his career as a whole, that's pretty unusual. But he crashes twice in qualifying 1, just trying to get through into qualifying 2. And then, like you say, he had the huge crash in warm-up. His weekend it just wasn't. It never really took off, and he couldn't really. It just seemed like he couldn't accept it, and he was just trying way too hard instead of sitting back and taking the viewpoint of it's not my weekend, and maybe just pick up a few points in the race. And as it turned out, it rained, so he could have even won the race if he hadn't put himself out. So yeah, I think it was a little bit like the old Marc Marquez, but not the one that dominated sort of 2019. It was sort of the one that lost the championship in 2015, if that makes any sense. So yeah, it was a very, very messy weekend for Marc.
Yeah, and of course he ended up having 110 mile an hour high side in morning warm up. Now, a lot of people are giving out saying that he was pushing too hard. It was actually an off throttle high side, so there's people pointing the finger at the new Honda. There's people pointing the finger at the slightly harder compound of tyre, saying that it just let go on him. Getting colder temperatures in the morning, slightly a track that's had rain. It really is just kind of a lot of variables come together for that crash. But he landed on his head, was definitely blacked out for a bit during the crash, and when he came back to his feet, his equilibrium was all way out because you could see he was just struggling to walk. He was holding his hands. He was just dazed, and the right decision was made. Unlike with the Ricardo Rossi incident, the right decision was made that he was not to race. But jumping now to Sunday and the race, monsoon conditions hit just after the Moto2 race ended, and we had the safety car out doing 5-6 laps every few minutes, and it looked about 3 feet underwater. What did you think at that point of the night view at that point when we were up 5-6 in the morning watching this back? What did you think was going to happen with all that rain, Reese?
Well, it was certainly interesting. It very much reminded me of Silverstone 2018, the whole thing, obviously with the that race being called off due to the rain. Obviously, there was a lot more rain here, but obviously, again, similar. It wasn't draining, so there was so much of it, and all the TV having to try and fill while they're waiting for news to see what happened next. But yeah, it was insane amount of rain. Obviously, the safety car was virtually underwater, so there was no way there was going to be a race. But good job they brought the Shaman in, to stop the rain, because we got a race in the end because of that. I mean, that was interesting. Probably one of the highlights of the weekend was just that whole situation. I mean, if you were watching it on BT Sport as well, all the presenters there were having a right good laugh, and then Fabio Quartararo started messing around with the bowl and just taking the mick out of them. It was it's crazy, and I think the best part is they've flown her in. Someone had actually flown her in from Bali to stop the rain, which it definitely made what could have been quite annoying, especially because we'd got up to see the race, made it quite funny. So yeah, it was crazy weather conditions, crazy just atmosphere in general. So yeah, it was a good job we got a race in the end, though.
Yeah, exactly. So whether the Shaman did his job or not, we won't go into too much detail about that. But we did get a race just after 8:15 UK Irish time GMT, 4:15 Indonesian time. So we were kind of getting up against the daylight hours of running out of daylight as well, which in the storm and monsoon season it can get dark as early as 5:30. So we were kind of in a short window, and we thankfully managed to get a race. Now the track was still wet. It was still spitting, just lightly raining in the opening laps, but Jack Miller jumped straight into the lead early on, got ahead of Fabio Quartararo. Fabio not known to be much of a wet weather rider, so it was interesting to see how he would go backwards but then recover. What did you make of his ride from Fabio first?
Well, I was very impressed with him. I mean, yeah, he's not so much of a wet rider. The Yamaha in recent years, there's not been much of a wet bike. I mean, if you go back a few years, it wasn't too bad. I mean, Rossi used to do pretty well on it in the rain, although that might be more rider than bike, but still, obviously the Yamaha has not been too great in the rain, but I think in a way that did help them a little because it was a bit of an equaliser in terms of you can't get on the power as much, so they weren't at so much of a disadvantage. So I guess that kind of helped Fabio in a few places, but I think if it had been dry, he would have cleared off and won. So I suppose he was disappointed that it rained, but he put in another champions ride like Le Mans last year. He, even though it's conditions that didn't favour him, he didn't let it bother him. If that was 2020, he'd have been picking himself out the gravel probably at some point. Like it's like last year. He's showing this is the kind of ride that you end up winning the championship with. Obviously, like you say, he dropped back initially, but never too far back. I think he was only as low as 5th ever. So again, that would have been fine to sit there in 5th. Let the race come to him. He started cashing up to Alex Rins. So he made a pass on him, overtook Rins for 4th place. And then obviously Zarco and Miller were battling over 2nd. Obviously Zarco couldn't get past Miller. Miller was a bit of a roadblock at that point, and Fabio just went past them like they were standing still, caught them, passed them both immediately, and then he had a little bit of an attempt at catching up to Oliveira, but that was never really going to happen. He was never going to quite catch up to Oliveira. But yeah, what a performance it was from Fabio. I was very, very impressed with him.
Yeah, and we have to cover Jack. He did get a great start, and when I was watching the coverage, waiting for the race start, I was kind of tipping my hat. This is Jack Miller, Le Mans, Assen. These are Jackass. This is his sort of race, and he did get the start. He got to the lead, managed to pass everyone and get to the front. Had very good early pace, but as the track dried and people got a bit of a feeling, he seemed to be just lacking maybe that 1%. Ended up being, like you said, a bit of a roadblock. Miguel passed him, and I wouldn't consider Miguel Oliveira a wet weather specialist, but he was very confident. And just the overall grip they had in the rain was something that I've never seen from a MotoGP bike. They looked so quick in the rain. Like the way they were turning in, the braking, the way they were picking it up on the throttle. It was obviously fresh tarmac like that would give serious grip, but I was watching it, and the fact we saw little crashes, we only had one crash the whole race, and that was Jorge Martin, who actually just had a bit of he was kind of defending from Frankie, just kind of moved across and came back across the racing line, just touched a bit of a stream while braking with maybe 4 or 5 degrees of lean angle, front locked, and away she went. But magnificent Miguel Oliveira, that was something special. Maybe KTM aren't as in a dark spot as they were last year. P2 in Qatar, and now a race victory already in a season that for a lot of people thought KTM would see them down with Aprilia and being at the back of the grid. What did you make of the KTM performance in Mandalika?
Well, it was a bit of a surprise, really, because they didn't look too great in testing. Like, in any of the tests, it was either Sepang or Mandalika. Also, they've brought in the new team manager, which seems to be helping out quite a lot, but it just sort of came out of nowhere. They were both looking good all weekend, actually, to be fair. Even in the dry conditions, they were looking very good, but Oliveira made a great start. Obviously, like you say, sat behind Miller for a little bit, realised he was quicker, took the lead, and just controlled from the front, just like most of his MotoGP victories have been. Obviously, back in Portimao 2020, he just cleared off, controlled from the front there. Catalonia, he took the lead and just sort of controlled there. Obviously, the only anomaly to that really being Austria 2020, where he took the lead at the last corner when Miller and Polisbagro sort of both tried to have a contest, see who could brake as late as they could into the last corner. But again, he was just sat there comfortable. So that seems to be the way that Oliveira goes about winning his races. And I think that's kind of been the way he's done it throughout his whole career, to be fair. He's been very happy to be out the front and controlling the race. But speaking, obviously, the KTM performance, we've got to give it a little bit of a shout out to Brad Binder, because pretty much unknown to everybody throughout the race, he actually had to do the whole race with his ride height device down because something happened to it, which does bring into question a little bit about the ride height devices, and there has been a little bit of talk about that over the weekend. But yeah, well done to Brad Binder for actually managing to keep that upright on a failing ride height device.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, when they do go to wet conditions, the first thing they do is they just soften the bike up. The key thing for the wet is they like more weight transfer, so when you brake, they like the body of weight, the centre of gravity to go forward, just to generate heat, give the rider feeling. And the ride height device does the exact opposite. It will make the bike as rigid and low as possible. Every time I read this, I kind of think to myself, how the bloody hell did you make it one corner in the rain? Obviously, it goes one to how good the bike is, how good Brad Binder is as a rider, and obviously the track conditions, how grippy it was, because there would have been absolutely no give in that bike. That bike would have been rigid the whole race long. And like, most riders would have pulled into the pits, would have went backwards. He still fought for P10 coming home in a really, really respectable P8 ahead of his big brother in P10. We have to mention, of course, Dan Binder. We mentioned him in episode 1 and once again in episode 2. What a stunning ride. Now, he was one of the only riders in testing to go out during the wet weather. And look at this, it's obviously paid off for him. Brilliant ride. Battling his brother. There was a brilliant picture on BT in the penultimate corner of Brad just going up the inside of Darren, picking him up, and Darren just has a quick look across his brother. It was a great shot to see the two Binders battling. But again, a top 10 in his second race in the wet. Absolutely stunning from Darren. What did you make of the young rookie's performance?
Well, yeah, again, in the last episode, we obviously said he had a good race in Qatar, a good rookie race. Yeah, again, we're applauding Darren Binder, and Darren Binder was the guy that everyone thought, why has he got a MotoGP ride? You know, he's sort of shown, okay, he's all right in Moto 3, but perhaps he should have got to Moto 2, but he's been top rookie by quite a way, really, hasn't he, so far in the races. Maybe not in terms of headline times and stuff, because Bezecchi's been looking very good, but yeah, Binder picking up top points out of the rookies. I think obviously he just missed out in the last race to Remy Gardner, but he must be fairly well off in the top rookie standings now, because I think he beat the other rookies by quite a few places, because there was that massive scrap that he was involved in. So yeah, Darren Binder, I mean, on the Yamaha as well, which, like we were saying when we talk about Fabio, is supposedly not a wet weather bike. Fair play to him. What a weekend.
Yeah, and just for the other rookies, we had Remy Gardner in last to the finishers in 21st. Bezecchi, bit of a disappointing for me. You expect that Ducati to be a bit better in the rain, and Bezecchi is almost a 6-footer, so he's one of those taller riders that you expect a bit more in the rain. 20th for him. Fabio Di Giannantonio P18 and Raul Fernandez P17, so 4 out of the 5 rookies making up the back 4 out of the 5 positions. And then you go all the way up to P10, beating the likes of Alex Marquez, Paul Sparrow, Luca Marini, Francesco Bagnaia, and Enea Bastianini, the championship leader going into that race, who had big issues early in the race. I think that might be the first time he rolled that bike in the rain, because he was 4 seconds a lap slower than Jack in the opening race, or the opening laps of the race, I should say. But he did manage to fight his way back to a respectable P11. Probably again showing why it doesn't really pay off in a championship season to be in a privateer satellite team. Just missing out a small bit. But overall, what did you make of the 3 races from Mandalika and the first Indonesian Grand Prix in 25 years?
It was very, very good, really. We had some good races throughout. Obviously, like we said, it was an aggressive fight for second place in Moto 3. The start to Moto 2 was pretty tasty. Obviously, there was the rain as well, so Moto 2 keeping us interested. And MotoGP was a good race, which you don't always get in the rain. Sometimes the wet races can be a bit boring, but there was lots of chopping and changing in position. Obviously, we had that massive scrap. You don't see that in MotoGP. A long train of riders like that fighting for like 8th position, so that was pretty incredible. Obviously, the title rivals in MotoGP, the title favourites, all struggling except Quartararo. Really, obviously, Bagnaia, like you said, was proper down 1 point. He's picked up 1 point from the first 2 races. That's talking championship over already, kind of thing. Obviously, it's not been the ideal start to some of the others, like Quartararo, obviously Marquez being out, so he's got lucky in that way. But let's say Quartararo had won the first 2 races, you'd be looking at, you're already, up against it. So Bagnaia definitely needs to try and improve for the next race. But speaking of the weekend as a whole, it was I think it was a really, really good weekend. I hope the Indonesian fans really, really enjoyed it, because, yeah, like you say, first race in 25 years for them.
Yeah, now the only thing is a lot of people were saying that maybe we came a year too premature. They opened the track was finished a month before World Superbike went there at the end of last year, and from all the renders and all the plans of what the track was going to be, it's pretty bare bones at the moment. As well as, I didn't know this beforehand, but it's on a small island that isn't connected to the mainland, so you have to fly out there, and it is, especially for the average Indonesian, it's apparently a race ticket is a third of their yearly salary. So big issues there off the track with accommodation being overpriced. I saw Simon Paris on Twitter saying one night on a hotel 2 kilometers from the track, €212. That race weekend, the following weekend was like €19, so like 10 times the price you'd pay. So for the average Indonesian fan, it probably was a bit of a letdown that they couldn't get in. But maybe next year, hopefully, we can. I think it was a good learning process because the time of the day we were kind of still in the monsoon season. If we could maybe just push it a couple of weeks later in the year next season, and just a slight bit of running, and maybe again another year's development to that track, I think it could be a great track in the future. But a bit of a shaky start, but again, it's to be expected when we go to a country for the first time in 25 years. New track, everything is just going to be a bit rusty, the first one. So I look forward to going back to next year. I do like the track. It does provide some good racing, and of course the Indonesians are mad for the sport, so it's great that we have a race in Indonesia. And yeah, it's time now though to look forward to Argentina, a track that 2 years ago you might have said never going to come back after a huge fire. I genuinely didn't think we'd ever go back here, but thankfully 2 weeks time we are back to Termas de Rio Hondo. What do you think will be the headlines come Argentina?
Well, I tell you what, I completely forgot about that fire till you just mentioned it. Yeah, that was crazy, wasn't it? A few years ago, there was a massive fire in the paddock, and yeah, I was thinking the same as you. That would be it, that they'd never go back. But obviously, in a way, the pandemic has helped them because MotoGP haven't been there. They've had enough time to build that paddock back, so I think should be fine going there. In terms of headline results, obviously, it does depend on the weather a little bit. Marquez has always been pretty good there, so provided he's going to race there, might be worth watching out for him, but of course he's still struggling. Who else has been pretty good there in the past? It's quite hard to say because they haven't been there since 2019, so obviously riders like Quartararo have only done one race there, and a lot of the riders haven't raced a MotoGP bike there, so I think it could be quite an interesting weekend because a lot of the guys that we now consider front runners obviously weren't front runners when we last went there, so it's hard to gauge how good they'll be. You know, the likes of Mir, Bagnaia, I have no idea how good they're going to be at Argentina. Obviously, they're going to have their base performance because, you know, they're top flight MotoGP riders. They're not going to just start finishing last because they haven't raced a MotoGP bike at the track before. But there's definitely going to be an advantage for some of the more experienced riders like your Marquez's, your Millers, those kind of riders. And if we get some crazy conditions, we could get a 2018 repeat for Jack Miller there getting pole position. So yeah, I think it'll be a tough weekend to call, but it should be a good one, and it'll be nice to see them back in Argentina.
Yeah, I am looking forward to it. I do like that track. It has a nice flow to it, and a lot of modern tracks are trying to be very complex and complicated. It's a bit more of a simple track, long corners, kind of, it has flow to it, which is a good track. The only thing, track conditions, usually when you go there, it hasn't been used now. With the pandemic and stuff, nobody knows what the track conditions like, but I have fond memories of when we used to go there in 16, 17, 18. Friday was just a write-off. It was a track cleaning day. Moto 3 would go first thing Friday, and it would be kicking up dust like it would be at Qatar. So we could have another race like the last 3 races where it's just track cleaning. So that all throws a bit of a spanner into works when it comes down to getting bike setup, race pace, and just getting an idea of the form book. So again, another race weekend that we're not going into going, okay, we're going to expect Miller on the podium, Marquez is definitely in for the win. It's just question marks again, and I think that is just the joys of modern MotoGP, that we're going to a track and we're maybe naming 7, 8 riders that you could go, yeah, I could see them having a good weekend, but then you could also go, well, they haven't been there, you never know what they'd be like, that bike could work well there. It's just it's the joys of it at the moment. We have so many question marks, but I think that will do it for episode 2 of the MotoGP-Xtra podcast. What do you think, Reese?
Yeah, I think that's about it. I don't really have anything else to add. Like you say, obviously it's just it's been a long time since they last went, so it's hard to predict, and that's just modern MotoGP in a nutshell. you can win one weekend and be last the next because of how close it is. So yeah, it's just I've not really got anything else to add to that.
No, so we will end it off there. So we hope you have enjoyed episode 2. Of course, this will be aired on both our YouTube channels as well as our Spotify account. So 2 more weeks and we will be in Argentina. We'll catch you all in a couple of weeks. Thanks for tuning in. Bye bye.